This meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for June 21st, 2023 will come to order. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Member Press, you're the only one that followed directions. You wore shorts.
Hey, you gave me the opening.
Roll call, please, Lori.
Chairman Richardson,
Here.
Vice Chairman Aton, Secretary Grant,
Here.
Member Perez,
Here.
Member Faison, Member Garad,
Here.
Alternate Member Childs, Alternate Member Rogers, School Board Member Gilbert. Here.
Okay, we barely have a quorum, but we do. Before we go into the minutes, I got approval from Mr. Childs to say this. Alternate Member Childs suffered a minor heart attack over the weekend. And he spent the weekend in Jess Parish, and he was released on Monday. And he has a stent that didn't extend all the way. Dr. Matthews did extend it the entire way now, so he's recovering, but he was told to take it easy for a few days. So he won't be here tonight. And if you're watching, Chris, I told you to watch Animal Planet or something unstressful tonight. But our prayers are with Alternate Member Childs. Okay, the minutes of the meeting of June 7th.
Mr. Chairman, I've read the minutes, and I would like to make a recommendation we approve the minutes.
You second?
I second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Member Garad,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. Since accessory dwelling units are under old business, I think we should take that up after the two conditional use permits and understand the conditional use permit number 9A is going to be delayed. Is that right, Eddie?
Close. Number 9B, CUP number 2, 2023, All-American Oil will be withdrawn and re-advertised for a later date.
Okay.
Sorry, which one?
9B.
9B, CUP number 2.
So does the commission agree to take things out of order on the agenda?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. 9A conditional use permit number 1, 2023. Eddie?
Yes, sir. Thank you. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to allow outdoor storage as an accessory use at an existing Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, post located at 4411 Capron Road. A CUP is required for outdoor storage as an accessory use in the Light Industrial Services and Warehousing, M1 zoning district, when the future land use designation is not industrial, per the land development regulations. A conditional use permit was issued on the site in 1997 to erect a telecommunication antenna on the site. That's CUP number 4, 1997. Variance number 6, 1997 was approved on the site to reduce the rear yard setback for the antenna to 63 feet. The subject property contains 1.79 plus or minus acres and is located within the city's area of critical concern. A portion of the site has been used for outdoor storage. However, a CUP for the accessory outdoor storage use has not previously been approved. The applicant is requesting to allow outdoor storage as an accessory to the current Veterans of Foreign Wars post as an economical resource for veterans to park their RVs, boats, etc. The future land use designation on the property is commercial high intensity, and the zoning district is light industrial services and warehousing, M1. I did want to point the commission to 2 pages, the first being page 30 of 63 of tonight's agenda. Page 30 includes the applicant's site drawing with the wood 6-foot fence proposed and a parking area. And I wanted to point out that the drawing as shown does not meet all of the limitations that are required in the code, as outdoor storage as an accessory use is a permitted use, or it requires a CUP, and there are certain limitations that must be met. So in our staff report, you may have noticed several sections that were, the language was bold, and those are additional staff recommendation conditions that would need to be met in order for this use to be approved. And that is on page 22 of tonight's agenda. Towards the bottom of the page is the staff recommendation of approval with the 4 conditions. The first is that an opaque masonry wall or opaque high-security fence at least 8 feet in height shall be provided between the Capron Road right-of-way and the portion of the site used for the accessory outdoor storage use. 2, a stabilized surface shall be illustrated on the site plan for all areas used for outdoor storage. 3, no outdoor storage is permitted within the minimum building setbacks of the M1 zoning district. And 4, that landscape yards be illustrated on the site plan consistent with the code, unless a variance is approved. And that's my report. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Eddie Galindo?
A couple of questions, Eddie, if I can. The site plan's kind of vague as I would see it, and of course, they have to go through the later stages of a more refined plan. I am a little confused as to where the parking area is going to be when I look at this particular sketch. It kind of illustrates it being up against the railroad tracks as opposed to along the street front. And the wooden fence you talk about, mentioned, is along the street front. The way it's described in the package of information, it appears parking's going to take place on the unpaved portion of the property, which I kind of thought looks like it's in the southern portion of the property as opposed to the east portion. And I thought in the case of the fencing, if in fact it's going to be parking in an area that's unpaved and that area could be pushed towards the railroad tracks, you wouldn't have quite the buffer concerns you may have if it's adjacent, as it would be contiguous with the road, which is across the street from the residential area. Is that how it is? Is the parking going to be along the railroad right-of-way as illustrated, or is it going to be in the area along the roadway?
Sure. I'll let the applicant describe where they propose to have the outdoor storage, but I did want to point before getting to that, point 2 on page 22. It's letter G. That says section 28-364 C2G shall utilize paving or other stabilized surfaces that are designed and constructed to ensure soil or water contamination does not occur in all areas utilized for outdoor storage. So wherever outdoor storage is proposed, there must be some type of stabilized surface or paving. It can't be parked on grass or an unstabilized surface.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of the staff? Okay, at this point, I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to speak?
My name is Ray Gammon. Who's the button on the right-hand side? Right-hand side.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. My name's Ray Gammon. I was the commander of the VFW until 2 days ago. I'm now the past commander. The new commander is Ted, and he's requested that, since I've had it for the last year, to continue. We plan on coming up to whatever requirements is put down on us. If we can move the parking on the south end over towards the railroad track and help us, we'll do whatever it takes, okay? We plan on getting a contractor in to put whatever is needed for parking. Now, this is only RVs. When I say RVs, tow-behind trailers, small, like work trailers that people have converted. Every now and then, we may have a Class A in there, but it's most of the time parked right behind the parking. But that's only a snowbird going through, but that's basically what we're looking. We did not know that we were out of compliance until a year and a half ago, and we're trying to get us back into compliance to make everybody happy. Any questions?
So you don't have any problem meeting those conditions? I think there are 4 conditions.
That's correct. I have no problem. If I can move the parking over towards the railroad tracks more, because I got plenty of space back there, okay? And it would allow me to put up a lower fence, the cost would go down greatly for me. But right now, an 8-foot fence, we will do it. But if we can move the parking down and make a no parking zone for that requirement, we will do it. We'll do whatever it takes to get it done.
Eddie, do you have any comments on that?
No, sir. If all the conditions can be met, then the next stage, just so the commission's clear on the process, if the CUP, if you recommend approval and council approves the CUP, the next step is the site plan, submitting the engineered drawings of the stabilized surface outside of the M1 zoning building setbacks, meeting all the conditions in this CUP.
Okay, and I would make a note that it's confusing to follow these maps because the north arrow is pointing down, north arrow is pointing up, north arrow is pointing east. North arrows should always point in the same direction, because if you follow the maps, they are kind of confusing. Member Garad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for the applicant and then one for the staff. Eddie, you mentioned that this has been about a 1.5 trial and tribulation to get here. I'm assuming that came about from some code enforcement action?
That's correct. We had lightning strike 2 of our pine trees, the non-Florida pine trees, the tall ones, and I was not involved in this. I'm just picked up after it. A tree service was in town doing major work, and they came by, gave our quartermaster, who handles our money, a good price. And so we cut down the 2 trees. We had a complaint to the city about cutting the trees down. Got a code problem with that. Turned out that the company that cut the trees down did not get a permit, but they said they would get a permit. They got a permit that day, okay? But then the code enforcement officer found us having parked vehicles back there that we did not know was out of appliance. So all we're trying to do is get back into compliance. We would like to use that space because the money goes into our relief fund. Excuse me. We use that for people who can't pay their rent, their electric, and this, we've been hurting to pay. Okay, so.
You've answered the question I begged was how did the code enforcement get involved and whether it was the observation of the parked vehicles, which now tends to be something less onerous to the residents if it wasn't the parked vehicles. So that kind of focuses on my next questions. The buffer zones are probably for your economic purposes extremely important that you consider where you're going to park these vehicles and perhaps how many, because I believe you would control the area necessary for buffering by the size of the area you designate for parking. If you bite off more than you can chew, you won't be able to probably provide the economic benefits you just spoke of. And so that's why my question came, where's the parking area? Along the railroad tracks, I would suspect would not have any buffering requirements in the same measure it would have it across the street from the residents. And in the buffers to extend a fence 6 feet or even 8 feet when you've got a 13-foot height recreational vehicle, you're not going to obscure the view of that very, you won't obscure it 100% if the intention is to make it completely opaque to visual observation between those different zoning districts. So I was kind of going to suggest that you, as you develop your site plan for the staff to review, possibly looking more into a landscaping buffer, which is provided for when I read through your report, mainly because there are certainly some species of plants that could be planted with fast growth potential, and their opacity is going to be better than that of a 6 or even 8-foot fence. And controlling the growth, you could probably have the plants exceed the height of the RV. Having that I own one, I'm a little familiar with how they look. And that would be my suggestion, is to really work closely with staff to look at the buffers to try to find one that's economically more feasible for you than a masonry wall at $150 a running foot. And the fencing is the same, and that's why I suggest focusing on where you're going to park them by the number that you're going to provide parking to try to control how much buffering you need.
What we plan, I think there's a misunderstanding, and it may be how I put the plan in, but we plan on our south end, we got storage units. What we plan on doing is backing the trailers up to 6 foot off the property, the storage units, and we were going to start at the road and work east. But from what I understand, we'll start on the east, right next to the railroad tracks, and it's just right now it's brush. We can clear that out, and then, but we only plan on meeting the code, if it's approved, as many as we believe we can get in there. And right now, we're talking 10, maybe 12, okay? And we will get a contractor in to meet, the contractor is going to tell us what we need to meet the codes, okay? We're very flexible there. We do not want to park them north-south because it'll eat us up, take our driveways away and things like that. So it's going to be 6 foot off of the wall, starting on the east, and we'll probably do maybe 10. We got 4 in there right now that are permanent. They're there 12 months a year, except when they're gone on vacation on them. We have 2 VFW trailers that are hurricane trailers. Every VFW post has at least one. Some have a lot more. We have 2. They're full of hurricane supplies. And this year we used them twice. So now those we will park for easy pickup because we just get a call. We find out a vehicle's coming to pick those trailers up, and they can be on the West Coast in 12 hours. So
That's all really good, and I think your idea of starting on the east side and moving west will be to your benefit, and reducing your area as your contractors, you mentioned, will look at that. I think that would be very helpful to your goal,
Okay.
balancing the economics and the benefit of it. So I wouldn't want to see you not be able to do what you're doing by any measure. I'd just caution you to kind of work with staff and see what you come up with that could help everybody save money.
yep.
Mr. Perez?
This is for Eddie. Eddie, as far as the wall's concerned, what are the options on that? Because I see that recommendations an 8-foot masonry wall. Does that change as they move away from the, I guess, the western side of the property?
Give me just a minute to review the limitations, and I will answer your question. 1 second. Okay, I found it. It's on page 21, letter D. And it says, it's a limitation of the use shall be screened from view from adjacent rights-of-way and from adjacent lots with non-industrial uses or zoning by buildings and/or an opaque masonry wall or closed opaque fence extending at least 6 feet in height from the ground. All fences shall be maintained in good condition. a chain link fence shall not meet the visual buffer or screening requirement from adjacent non-industrial uses. An opaque landscape buffer of no less than 20 feet in depth may be utilized in place of a masonry wall or opaque fence. So if the commission's desire was to request or to make a condition of approval that a 20-foot deep landscape buffer be provided in lieu of a wall or fence, you could do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Grodd?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was where I was trying to head to. I don't profess to know, but I would think the buffer along the railroad would be more like a like-kind land use and zoning for what's across the right-of-way going east is commercial. So there wouldn't be that onerous requirement of a masonry wall along there. And no kidding aside, if the old story about I can block the sun with my thumb, if you put the landscaping cost to the front on the street, the view is going to be obscured because of the angle of the distance. It's one of those geometric things you recall learning somewhere in school. And I think it might be a good project for your veterans to get into. Landscaping's kind of fun, saves you some money. And then if you were to put it up against the west end, it might be a doable thing all the way around.
Yes.
Any other things you want to add?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are the cards, Lori?
Yes, sir. Gerald Schoff.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, I just want to introduce myself. I'm the new commander for the VFW, and I'm kind of trying to catch up. We're doing a transition right now. But, oh, thank you, thank you. The only thing I wanted to, when he was talking about the parking, most of that parking is actually, it's overflow. We hardly ever park there. It's when we get parties or what have you, or we have an event there. So it hardly ever is full of cars. So other than that, I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you. Next card.
Constance Ashworth.
I have some photographs. Should I give them to you or give to these guys? I have one for a little packet for each person. So then here is each. I'll take them out and see what I need. I thought there would be 9. There's one packet for you too, but so you'll have some extra because there's not everybody here. So, but you see how I did it? It's like you do packet. Everybody gets 5 photographs.
Thank you.
I'm on. Is that why it's lit? Constance Ashworth, Titusville, Florida. I live across the street from the VFW. And I've got some photos there. I can start with photo number 1. You're actually looking, the left side of that first one is my mailbox, which would be this going south and on the north. And then the other photos, I think, are flipped around. Somebody here mentioned that it was hard to understand north and south. So then all the others are taken of across the street of the VFW, which shows the left side of the photo is north. But, so there's a photo there. The VFW has 2 entrance gates. They have 2 gates on Capron. One I call the north gate on the left side of the VFW photos, and one I call the south gate. The north gate is the one I observed used almost all the time, with the south gate kept closed. This is to get in the parking area. However, on a few occasions when the north gate was closed and only the south gate was used, the public right-of-way has been impacted as follows. One time, 2 gentlemen were trying to back out of the south entrance, back out this very large flatbed rig, and the tail end of the rig grazed my mailbox, knocking it over. So I went out, and they were very nice. They put it all back up again, but it was never completely right, and I just lived with it, slanted, and I did have to go and buy a new flag and figure out how to get it on, make a trip to the hardware store. Okay, another time, I noticed my water pressure was way down. It was a Friday. So when I called the city and they said, we think there's some work somewhere in the area, and that's probably why. And that was a Friday, so I went through I didn't actually go out to check my mail until the night, a couple days later, and I saw a river going from my water meter, which is in one of the photos where those little pilings are. A river was going down Capron towards 50. Come to find out, in the daylight, you could see the giant tire, because this is, again, when the south gate was open and the north gate was shut. To get in there, somebody came from 50, and you could see the tire tracks went over that's my water meter right there, around those little pilings. And to get in the south gate, busted my water meter. So the city paid for that one because it was broken on the city side, so they fixed that at their expense. Okay, but then it happened again, and I better read my notes, because I'm gonna get mixed up where I am. Okay, it was busted again. A visiting neighbor who doesn't live there anymore, they had a visiting, Class A, big Class A, to get in their very small yard, and they went over it too. And after that is when I got the pilings to put around. You could see those there. So I did have to pay for it that time because it wasn't broken on the city side. It was $275 I had to pay the plumber when it was busted that side. So approval of a conditional use permit means there can be no negative impact on the public right-of-way. Approving this conditional use permit will only intensify what is already happening. Bollards.
Go ahead.
Okay, it's only, I only have, thank you. Bollards, is that those things? Yeah. Bollards maybe, or some kind of curbing could be installed maybe to protect that right-of-way. If the board is to approve this, the VFW should be, I feel, required to plant shade trees equivalent to all the giant pine trees they removed in preparation for this, I assume, but I don't know. There is an impact on the local ecology with the mass removal of those trees, such as the urban heat island effect. Those trees, in a minor way, also helped mitigate the sound from the freight train. And the fence screening the VFW, which I showed you, I was very glad to hear there is possibly some other things they would have to do. I would love, if they did a masonry wall, I have no problem with that. But the fence screening, I was hoping, I put pictures that that's not what's going to be used. You can see it's already ripping, and it's kind of an eyesore. So maybe a hedge. I loved the talk of the landscaping, or that's really all I have, or
Okay.
or the wall would be great.
Are there any questions? Mr. Prez?
Yeah, actually, questions of the gentleman. I was wondering, yeah, you can come up.
Should I sit down?
Yeah.
Yes?
Okay.
Okay.
What trees will you be taking out? I didn't even realize there would be a,
We don't plan on taking any
Okay.
trees out.
okay,
And
because I didn't hear that. I heard
Okay,
that
and the
some
pine
trees that were
trees
damaged were
that-
taken out.
And the pine trees that we did take out were 2 pine trees near the communication tower, and they had been struck by lightning, and they were leaning, and we took them down we thought we were doing the right thing. Okay? I take a look at these pictures, and the green fence that's up, every time we have a windstorm, and that's the code, that fence. Our maintenance person goes out, we've doubled the tie wraps on them. We're doing everything we can. As for the south gate being open, we don't receive any big trucks in the south gate. They all come in the north gate. The water meter and the water lines are across the street from us. So, and she lives across the street from us. I don't see how, especially these commercial drivers, are doing this. She never brought it to our attention. If so, we would have tried to appease. But that gate may be open 3 times a year, 4 times a year. And it's mostly for when we have a Christmas float. We put the float together in the yard and we pull it out. It's pulled out with my F-350. and I never go on the grass, okay? So, these pictures are, I would love to have known she was bringing these pictures, because I would have taken the pictures of her yard. It's the worst-looking yard in the neighborhood.
That's
I'm
not
sorry.
in there.
Okay. Any other questions?
Would you be willing to talk to her when she has any problems? She tells you and solve those problems?
Well,
I'm okay with it. I would talk with you. I think you take care of the lowest level. I'm okay with it.
yep.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Yep.
No, you technically can't.
I did contact the VFW, the manager, I did communicate.
You're only allowed to speak when you're.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, okay.
Any other cards?
That was all, thank you.
That's all the cards. The public hearing is closed. It comes up before us again. Would anyone care to make a motion? Mr. Prez?
Well, before I get to the motion, I would think that being neighbors, that you would try to bring things to each other's attention. And certainly if going to one individual doesn't get the result, at least of, some interchange, I would persist, okay? Because everywhere I go, first person tells me something that just doesn't quite, rise to the level of what you think, you deserve, then, you go a little bit further, okay? And I think it's only befitting that you all talk to each other, whenever things like that come up. That water metering could have easily been struck by some other one, going across there. But that's not the point. The point is, if you didn't see it happen, anything could have happened.
Anything else? Anyone care to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion, and to follow the line of discussion I had, I think it would be to recommend approval of the conditional use in the staff's report, particularly about the buffers, and given the somewhat ambiguity of where exactly the parking's going to be, to have the applicant work with the staff as the condition of approval to locate the parking area as far east of the property boundary on the road as you can provide for. And in the same instance on the buffer, to work with staff on a landscaping buffer as opposed to looking at walls, if they can use the landscaping buffer because they're far enough east to not be considered contiguous with the other zoning district. And that's something I have to admit sounds vague for me to say, but I believe you get the gist of what you need to look at. And at the same instance, trying to look at interpreting where a boundary is by a zoning district as opposed to where on the site the parking actually occurs, and to buffer that area adequately. And I do think, given geometry, pushing it to the east, will be to your benefit. So it would be a recommendation of approval with the staff's report for conditions on buffering, for the consideration the parking area be moved to the east as much as possible, and to consider landscaping buffers as opposed to masonry walls.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Member Prez, okay. Member,
Chairman, could I just ask for clarification? Does that mean also including the other recommendations related to a stabilized surface, which is part of the code requirement?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that outdoor storage will not be permitted within the building setbacks of the M1 zoning district?
he said all your
Yes.
conditions.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Did we get a second?
Yeah, I think we did. Member Prez did, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay.
Member Garad,
Yes.
Member Perez,
Yes.
Secretary Grant,
Yes.
Member Faison,
Yes.
Chairman Richardson.
Yes. Okay, this will be heard at city council when, Eddie?
July 11th.
Okay, July 11th is the hearing before the city council. Item 9B has been removed. Now we'll go back to 8A, accessory dwelling units discussion. You got here just in time, Mr. Faison. Did every member of the commission see all the documents and the briefing by Brad Pierce, which we had gotten a briefing about the Live Local Act, but it sounded completely different at council meeting.
Sure did.
You heard it too.
Oh, yeah.
I was not aware that you could build affordable housing units in an M1 zoning. And, but anyway, we have on page 6 of 63, we've got those 7, is it 7? 7 items of discussion. Historical structures, size, flexibility, impacts to neighborhood, acceptance into the neighborhood, commonality and implementation into the neighborhood, and a simplified ordinance. Is there anything else we need to add before we start the discussion on those points? Yes, Secretary Grant.
Well, I'm still against ADUs in commercial districts. I'm still not convinced. I just cannot see the value added here. We're talking about affordable housing here, and I'm having a hard time connecting the two, residential to commercial, you know, and
I think
convince me otherwise.
accessory dwelling units in the case we're talking about just applies to residential units.
not in the Indian River City District.
Well, that's the one case.
Well,
Member Garrett.
I also watched the city council discussion on Live Local Act, and having read that from its inception through its legislative path to its signature by the governor, it is best put that zoning regulations didn't used to exist, and they came about historically because of problems. And I mentioned at the last meeting that the tenement laws that emanate from New York came because people took advantage of people living in dwellings. They got smaller and smaller, and all the rules you know to be zoning rules, from setbacks to building codes with windows and ventilation, really emanate from that particular period of time. Full circle, the Live Local Act is trying to enhance that and trying to remove local regulatory authority to be an impedance, where you would have these rules structured around Euclidean zoning, where you segregate uses, commercial, industrial, and residential. The foot that's out there now moving is to try to integrate those uses. And I think the Live Local Act is an attempt on the state's behalf to provide for that, overreaching that of the local governments. Perhaps some local governments are more restrictive in their opinion of their communities, and other local governments are more liberal in their opinions. A lot of the idea of residential and commercial and industrial areas work better, I would say it that way, or appear to be working better when they're in major metropolitan areas where these industrial sites could support residential communities. In some cases, in some of the planned communities where they integrate industrial, commercial, and residential live, work, play. They also do that, but you see it as a planned development, and it doesn't seem so obtrusive to you as a planned development, perhaps. But the real upshot to this is that there are some very important features of this about affordable housing that accessory dwelling units aren't really entirely within that. The type of accessory dwelling, the Palm Bay rule we were given to look through, the direction that maybe that's a good rule, some questions I'm going to have about that. That probably isn't the best thing to try to compare to the Live Local Act, because it's trying to do it in a much more broad brush effect where you, and I actually thought about this after I watched the city council debate, when I look at the industrial cement plant area that's west of the railroad right away. Been there since I grew up.
The former Rinker.
Yeah, it's Rinker. And, you know, it's sitting there in a dilapidated condition. It's not functioning. It's not a very pleasing sight to look at. That kind of property, and in my own experience, same kind of thing. Cement plants in downtown areas just go by the wayside and sit there unused and deteriorated conditions. I myself see the Live Local Act integrating something like that as an impetus for the property owner who, unless I'm incorrect, for some 20 years, maybe 30 years, there hasn't been a cement plant operation there. And there's no impetus to do anything because somebody's saying, what can I build there? I'm not running my cement plant. You could almost envision that would be a site that would be a catalyst for. Someone would come in and say, I've got this industrial zoning, there's not many uses for it. What if I put affordable housing there under the Live Local Act? I myself see it kind of working in that direction here in Titusville.
But wouldn't that be different from an ADU?
Yes, the
That
ADU
would.
is, I think we should, I apologize for speaking, I think we should make accessory dwelling units affordable. And the way you style your ordinance would create an environment for affordable development for the person who's building it to provide for it. And the consequence of that is if it's affordable to build, it's affordable to rent. And that for accessory dwellings seems like the right thing. The Live Local Act is a much larger picture, and I don't think it was intended or should be looked at as affecting accessory dwelling units. It's a much bigger global kind of picture.
So when I think of the Live Local Act and its inception and what it's trying to do, and then when I think of ADUs, I think we need to make sure that we keep the conversation separate from
Yeah.
Yes.
ADU
Yeah.
and Live Local Act.
Yes.
So when it comes to the Live Local Act and promoting affordable living, affordable housing in areas of commercial, I don't have a problem with that, okay? But again, that's separate from ADUs. Now, when Member Grant mentioned ADUs in a commercial area, and I saw that, and so ADUs are sort of allowed, like behind a shopping plaza, you can put an ADU in the back. Now, so I'd like to kind of talk about that just for a moment. Have any of you guys been behind O'Reilly's on Garden Street?
Yeah.
That's a homeless camp there. Okay? The young man that has dreads that's on the corner of US 1 and Garden Street is a young man that I grew up with, homeless. All right? And he's staying right now in a location, I won't say where it's at, but he's got a tent and he's living in the woods. So although we may be against that, right now, there's a huge problem with homelessness. The good thing about some ADUs are that as easy as they go up, they can come down. So we need to do something because there's nothing. We had Carrefour here speaking about producing something for homeless, and the community came out against it. So we have to do something, even though we may not be in favor of it. If the laws allow it, if our ordinance allow it, then I support it.
All I was saying is that I don't have any problems with ADUs in residential area, any residential area. Even I've softened my opposition to ADUs and historical properties, which I think degrades historical properties, but let's not go there. I do have problems with ADUs in commercial properties. It doesn't not seem right. It's like it's a bad big toe. It's just not right.
No, so let me tell you, so
too.
I agree with you. So when I read it, that it can go on a commercial property, the first thing I thought of was behind a strip mall. That's the first thing I thought of, was an ADU behind a strip mall, and like you, I don't want to see it. But if it provides housing for our vulnerable citizens, I stand behind it.
Well, I think the Live Local Act has really confused our discussion. We were taking accessory dwelling units as one portion, a small portion, to clarify. And it really came about when we were discussing minimum square footage, as I recall. And then this Live Local Act came in the same time, and affordable housing came into it too. I think we should step back and take one issue at a time. And the issue before us is accessory dwelling units. You know, where they're allowed, where they're not allowed. And I think they're mostly, correct me if I'm wrong, Eddie, they're mostly now in residential areas. They're not in commercial areas, right?
Correct, mostly in residential. And just so the commission can see that, if you want to follow along, it's on page 14 of 63. That's the section 28-351 that shows you which zoning districts they're currently permitted in and where they're not currently permitted in.
Oh, that's that chart.
I know you don't like the charts, yep. But so if you follow along with that, L means it's, the use is permitted with certain limitations, and the limitations are shown below in subsection C1. And so you'll see a lot of the residential, we've got RE, RR, R1A, R1B, R1C, all of those allow accessory dwelling units. My understanding was, when the commission wanted to discuss this, is that you wanted to see where they're allowed and if there's other districts where it should be allowed. And then of the limitations, are any of those limitations currently prohibiting or providing barriers to the development of accessory dwelling units? Because there was a perception that if there's an affordable housing issue, then accessory dwelling units would start to be built if they're currently allowed. And so I think you wanted to look at these limitations and see if there's anything that needed to be relaxed in the code if they were currently providing a barrier to the development of these ADUs.
And it originally came up as a discussion on minimum square footage, because Palm Bay's was 200 or 250, whatever it was, and ours was 450, I think. Correct me, Member Faison? It's 400. 400,
Minimum of 400 and a maximum of 600.
yeah. And let's stay on that subject if we can.
That's all we were. I was on ADUs. I wasn't on Live Local.
That's right. But a Live Local does mess the whole thing up
I know
to a
that.
degree.
I'm very much aware of it. I listened to the staff meeting also, and yeah, I was left with my mouth hanging open on that.
I was too.
Okay.
I was too.
And like I said, my beef was only about ADUs and commercial properties. I don't have a problem with them anywhere else. You know, I mean, no one's gonna build an ADU community, okay?
That's right.
It's gonna be in someone's backyard if they want it, but not in a commercial district.
Backyard or
Convince me otherwise.
backyard or inside, just for the commission and for those out in viewership, I contacted the Section 8 Housing Department about ADUs. And if you're able to build an ADU indoors, because we also have a lot size. So, ADUs can also go inside the home, not just outside the home. So if you build an ADU inside your home, that turns into a quasi duplex. And you're able to rent to two families at one time using one home. So that's what Section 8, they allow that, along with shared housing. So I'm not gonna go with shared housing. So if you build an ADU that has all of the necessary requirements of a bathroom and a kitchen, and a closet for the bedroom, that becomes, and if it can either be an efficiency, or if you're large enough to be a one-bedroom, it becomes a one-bedroom unit inside of another unit. And so, for example, using my house, because that's what I use as an example, the front part of my house can be a whole nother unit. Coming in my house, I have an outside entranceway, a long hallway where I can put two doors up, one into the ADU and then one to the rest of the home. Then I can rent my house out as a 3-bedroom and a 1-bedroom. So, for those, again, if people are looking for ways of maximizing and getting a property, you can do that. That's a possibility.
Okay. And where this discussion started, if I'm correct, was on the minimum square footage. And since we've seen all these exhibits and we've had this discussion, Palm Bay is it 200, 250? I think it's 250 square footage, which personally, I think it should be more like 350 or 400 rather than 250,
Chairman, in Palm Bay, the minimum is 200.
200.
No less than 200.
And I'll also add that there's a condition that says the air-conditioned floor area of the ADU shall not exceed 50% of the air-conditioned floor area of the principal structure.
Yeah.
In our current code, again, back on page 14 of 63, we've got in the letter E, we have a requirement that the ADU not exceed 25%. So in Palm Bay, it's allowed to be 50% the size of the home, of the primary structure. But in Titusville, we require it to be no more than, it can not be any larger than 25% of the size of the home. So we allow a much smaller ADU.
Could we eliminate that percentage and just go with square footage?
You could.
But we're adding too much math involved here.
The concern would be then, would the ADU potentially be larger or as large as the primary structure? And so maybe you want to add a limitation 50, 75% so that it's not larger, but that's something that you could consider.
Okay.
Well, if the minimum is, what's our minimum? 400?
400, I think.
And the max is 600. There's your parameters right there. I don't think let me see, the square footage of a single-family home, I believe, is 900 square foot.
The smallest one, I think.
The minimum is 900 square foot.
In which zoning district?
Ours.
We have several.
Well,
They vary by zoning district.
yeah,
Okay.
R1D, for example.
Yeah.
Right, so the 900 square feet, you might have seen that in your agenda packet, that's related to the PD. So in a planned development,
Okay.
if they were going to provide single-family homes, the minimum in the PD is 900 square feet. But I can look in the other zoning districts, if you give me just a second.
So while you do that, I have a question to my fellow commissioners.
Yeah. Member Faison.
Member Grant, I like your idea of doing away with size. I don't see why, if a property owner wants to do 50% of his home ADU and 50% of his home not ADU, I don't see what the problem with that is. If the homeowner wants to do that with his own home. Because what that is, that becomes a duplex. It's a duplex regardless, to be honest with you. So no matter what size that ADU is, it's still a duplex. Again, I use my home as an example. If I build the front part of my home into a 1-bedroom and the rest of my house is still a 3-bedroom, it's still a duplex.
Now, is it a duplex before you become an ADU?
No, it's not a duplex.
Okay, because you can't do that you can't put an ADU on a duplex if I remember
No, you
correctly.
cannot.
Okay.
No, but what I'm saying is that once you add an ADU to your property, inside the home,
Okay.
that home now becomes a duplex.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so why do we limit the size of the duplex inside the home? Why is there a percentage of it? This is what I'm asking. Why can it not be 50%? If me, the homeowner, want to turn my home into 2 separate homes of equal size, what's the problem with that?
Then aren't you basically renaming,
It's no longer a single-family home.
yeah, it's,
So the moment that you put an ADU inside your home, it's no longer a single-family home.
I can't see how it could be.
No matter what size it is, no matter what size it is.
No, I'm not saying that. You said half.
No, what I'm saying is whether it's 25%, 15%, whether it's 200 square foot in a 3,000 square foot home, and only 200 square foot is an ADU, it's still another unit. So you've just created a duplex, no matter the size of the ADU.
that's why it's called an accessory dwelling unit, correct?
Even though it's called an accessory, it's still a duplex.
I think we need to be careful here.
I do too.
We may be opening Pandora's box there that creates something 20 years from now that could cause nightmare beyond.
Once you do the ADU,
Remember garage.
Hopefully won't create a nightmare. It may be we're running a little bit out of the course of the discussion because in respect to duplexes, the discussion has to be that some zoning districts allow single-family homes in zoning districts that allow duplexes, and some zoning districts don't allow duplexes in single-family homes in Titusville zoning districts. Am I correct? Those zoning districts that permit duplexes based on the rule that regulates a duplex, how many square feet. It's not an accessory dwelling, it's two principal dwellings. If you are examining a duplex for impacts, you're examining them for the impact fees, excuse me, whether transportation, water, sewer, school, all of those associated fees are contemplated based on an analysis that says a duplex generates this impact. At the last meeting, I mentioned that one of the matters of accessory dwellings and looking at it maybe closer, focusing on some person like yourself owns a property and some person like myself owns a property. I have a need. I'd like to be able to do an accessory dwelling. In my need, it could be that I have a aging family member, and I'm one day, or I am already the aging family member. It could be that I need an income that, in my scenario, I'm a widow and I don't have the two incomes necessary to make ends meet, but I have the opportunity to capitalize, create a dwelling that I intend to rent, much like the vets mentioned that they're trying to help people that need that. So when I commented that if we examine accessory dwellings, we should also consider how could we enhance their ability to attract a person to do that. And it goes back to providing affordable housing. Palm Bay's rules and many other cities' rules to this prohibitive nature, they want you to be the resident owner and you aren't allowed to rent your accessory dwelling. That's poppycock, quite frankly, because as I mentioned, thinking that staff is going to keep up with that.
That's right.
Don't even consider it. And you shouldn't place that burden on a staff to try to keep up with it. It's burdensome. So.
You'd have to have a code enforcement department as big as a police department.
Yes, and so when you think about a duplex, I don't myself think of a duplex as an accessory dwelling. It's a duplex. When you think of an accessory dwelling, you're looking at an opportunity within a home that you would rent a bedroom. 200 square feet is little bigger than a large bedroom. It's not even, it's one car parking space in a garage. So when you have a rental bedroom, the problem with accessory dwellings that you want to not make them share the bathroom of a single-family home, so you have to do improvements to provide for that. Well, then you're coming back to the question, is it, as you called it, an internal to the house accessory dwelling? It's really creating a duplex. And I can see pretty clearly where the problem's going to become, that you're going to have staff, whoever that may be, at some point in time, wrestling with, is this an accessory dwelling because I want to integrate it in my home and I'm going to provide for the living facilities, which is kitchen and bathrooms inside of a dwelling unit as opposed to renting a bedroom. And when you do that, how is that not a duplex? And the way you do that is you have to kind of customize your standards for size, the development regulation for it, so that it isn't just a duplex by another name, in my opinion. And that's back to what is an affordable living area. And if it's set in stone that it's 200 square feet and you have a 600 square foot home, it's just somehow going to look more and more like a duplex. If you have a 3,000 square foot home and you allow the maximum size of an accessory dwelling that's attached to the home to be 1,000 square feet, it's 30%, 33% of what it is the balance of it, so it stays accessory. Some codes require the separation between the duplex and the accessory dwelling, that it's not permitted to be as you described it. It's not permitted because it immediately becomes viewed as a duplex. It's required to be attached, but not common to the unit. And I think those are discussion points. The idea of Palm Bay having a prohibition to rent, I think, should be discussed.
Yeah.
I had some questions about the Palm Bay code that I had kind of jotted down here. Another discussion point I think that should take place, and it's one of those things that come back later to haunt you, this idea of the parking
Yeah.
for this.
Exactly.
This is a problem that's going to happen. It's not necessarily intended, but when Palm Bay speaks about having not more than one or more than two spaces, I don't know how they're regulating the standard by which that parking is improved. Earlier tonight, Daddy, you mentioned about impervious material. So is the parking space interpreted to be okay as long as it's over there? Can you park on the grass in my single-family home? From what I see going around Titusville, I don't see a prohibition to cars parking in lawns. They're parked in lawns everywhere.
Not supposed to.
Yeah.
Back to trying to police the unpoliceable. That's really the issue. And so we need to kind of, I think, focus on rules that are implemented and regulated, reasonable by staff, and that provide the kinds of flexibility, not prohibiting rent. The same thing was a question I had about Palm Bay's rule that the homeowner must live there or they must live in the accessory dwelling, meaning that I'm old and I rent my home to somebody new and I live in my accessory dwelling. And that's kind of a factual event that takes place, especially with an aging community. That's going to be difficult because which of those dwellings is the one that's homesteaded? If you're going to intend that the resident is the owner of the property, the owner has to be.
Worms you open up there, man.
Yeah.
A homestead easily is policeable. You just pull up the tax rules and it tells you. But a homeowner that's going to take a 3,000 square foot home and exempt it from homestead exemption and go get a 200 square foot guest home and live in it seems impractical.
Okay, we have opened enough cans so far. And Chelsea, you've remained silent during this discussion. Do you have anything to add?
Turn your mic on, please. All right, so member, oh, go ahead,
Yeah.
Chelsea.
Well, it is all over the place. I don't know if you guys want to circle back to just the ADUs and the bullets that we had on the agenda, and if you
Yeah.
want to talk about how you want to go forward with this. I mean, we could talk about different variations of this all night, I think. There's a lot to unpack.
Well, what I was gonna say, Member Grant, was, again, I know I opened up Pandora's box by saying the duplex. So let me say this, I do agree with you that we do, after having this discussion, we should have a percentage so that people like me don't go overboard. And I'm going to agree with you, okay?
Code enforcement will be watching you.
If I may, I think as the bullet points go, in my opinion, I think size of the dwellings minimum and maximum and/or a percentage is a very common regulation for accessory dwellings. Sure it is. Establishing what those are, that's a discussion point. I myself believe that the discussion should focus on this prohibition to rental by a property owner and the requirement, however, that the property owner who's in turn renting it, accessory dwelling, trying to make a little scratch on the end when you're an old guy like me, that you don't allow the two units to become rental. I myself am having a difficulty looking at this from a perspective of affordability. That's part of our discussion. And reasonable policing of it, saying that a person, and I can cite as an example, I know it exists, and it is what it is, and the property is a rental property, the principal dwelling and the accessory dwelling. And there's two different groups of people there, and all those two different groups of people are all different in everything they do, when they work, when they don't work. All of that is what you see when you don't have the permanency of a homestead by a resident owner who is allowed to then rent his accessory dwelling. On the other hand, I don't think you should prohibit a landowner, a property owner, the taxpayer, the homestead person from renting it. Like Palm Bay says, you have to have or one of the codes we looked at, you had to be a family member to live in it. And that just
Yeah.
isn't good.
Okay, can we go back to page 9 and look at those 5 bullet points? And we should have called this relating to accessory dwelling units. And talk about sizes, square footage, the parking, utility connections, incentives where we saw St. Petersburg, or was it Pinellas County, talk about incentives to get the public to buy them and the look. What do you think about the size, minimum square footage of its ADUs?
We talked about that, didn't
Yeah.
we? We talked about that, 400?
Yep.
The minimum.
Do we agree that it's 400?
That's pretty good size, too.
I agree with 400
Tom?
minimum.
Okay, so we don't reduce the size of ADUs like Palm Bay. So we've established that. Parking. Orange County does not show parking, and they don't have a separate parking place, but I think Palm Bay does.
Because I look at ADUs as being in the home as well as outside the home, if it's inside the home, I'd like it to keep it the same requirement as the main unit of the home. You know what I mean? So if the main unit of the home, the principal dwelling, has a requirement, then that's the same requirement for the ADU. I would want to add additional parking.
Well, how many spaces is that? If the ADUs are the same requirement as the home, is that 2 spaces? Eddie?
Typically, yes, 2 spaces are required for a
Okay.
single-family home.
So you can't add 2 spaces for an ADU that's only 400 square feet.
So when I look at the city of Titusville, right, and the homes how many homes we have here, the size of lots that we have, and whether or not you're gonna not make it accessible for a great deal of folks because they don't have the area for it. Because already we have the minimum lot size for an outside of 10,000 square feet. So there's a lot of homes that are already just pushed out already, unless we've changed lot size. Lot size was 10,000 square foot. We haven't changed that yet, have we?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so only the older homes have 10,000 square foot. A lot of the newer homes don't have 10,000 square foot lot sizes.
Chairman,
Yes.
responding to that and also the previous question about the minimum floor area per dwelling unit. So I wanted to give 2 examples, the R1B zoning district, which is our single-family medium density, and then the R1C, which is our single-family high density. In the R1B, single-family medium density, the minimum lot area is 7,500 square feet, and the minimum floor area is 1,200 square feet for a home. In the R1C, the lot area minimum is 6,500 square feet, and the minimum dwelling unit is 900 square feet.
Okay. Chelsea had her light on.
Yes, so just to refocus everyone's discussion, the bullets of these points, either on page 9 or on page 6, are for the purpose of deciding if there's a difference from what you would like to see from what the code currently has. And so back to the parking, the ADU code section does address parking in the limitations. C1G. At least one, but no more than two, off-street parking spaces shall be provided for an accessory dwelling unit, parentheses, in addition to the off-street parking required for the principal use, end parentheses. So that's what we have in our code.
Right.
So it
And that's a
says at
paved
least
standard.
one, no more than two. So-
That's a paved standard, since you commented earlier that it's prohibited to park in the grass, even though it's like toadstools in the rain out there with cars parking in the grass. And those are paved by a standard that's enforced at the permitting level. Pavement means impervious, concrete,
It
pavement
has to be an
standards,
improved
et cetera.
surface.
Right.
Okay, so do we agree with that one parking maximum of 2 spaces?
Could I make a comment to think on? Trying to keep in line with that whole notion everyone's been trying to link to affordability and accessory dwelling. I'm not sure, the code's not perfect right now because it says one, but not more than two. If you were to say, I want to provide 10, you're going to have a family of 10 people living in the accessory dwelling potentially. And I think that's a good balance currently, that on the one hand, I only need one because it's my grandmother who's 105 and she's not driving, or a scenario like that. To get one more parking space is probably affordable, to go in and put an extra parking space in your driveway. But if you were to mandate it that you have to have 2, all of a sudden you've got 2-car driveways, and I can tell you from my experience what it costs to go in and make a parking area that size is $10,000 by the time you're done with it. And it's expensive, it's turning around the affordability angle. So I'm in favor of having the code exist for parking just like it is. I don't know that the Palm Bay Code's a good model for that.
Yes, Chelsea?
And then the other thing that I want to just reiterate is that when council sent this back, one of the questions that they had is, what would the impact on the neighborhood and the community be? And so by addressing this existing code, I think you can also have that conversation on this point, that this code, I think, adequately addresses the community needs for not overloading the parking on the residential streets by
Yeah.
having that no more than 2.
And I think we're headed that direction of the existing code rather than changing most of it, if I'm correct. Member Garage.
Another point to consider was, as I brought up in the conversation earlier, accessory dwelling, I go to the scenario of my grandmother living there. My grandmother wouldn't be driving a car, I assure you.
Not at 101.
Right. So the affordability angle can be promoted through simple techniques like looking at the impact fees that are driven by the construction of something that's a dwelling. You've got a transportation impact fee in effect, I presume, in Titusville?
We do.
Yeah.
And you have a school impact fee in effect, and then you have a water and sewer hookup fee, and I'm sure some other fees associated with it. When a person wants to do this and create a family dwelling, the intention is for my grandmother, the first thing they're going to face is this $50,000 cost up front. I'm using a number out of the air, it's not accurate, it's just an example, but it's an upfront cost. The second is, now I got to build a parking lot. Pretty soon I've got so much money on the table, I can't afford to even do it. So I would recommend that we at least explore how we could take those fees and somehow remove them. School impact fees, I don't think you should consider, because children could be there, not my grandmother. And once you make that decision, you're losing that impact for the school district. Transportation, an accessory dwelling may not have a person living there that's paying the rent affordably that can afford a car. They may be, like your friend you said is down at the street corner, trying to merge affordability with accessory dwelling. Those are my opinion, how you could enhance that. And trying to recommend to city council considering that, it would be, in my opinion, a good move to merge better affordability with accessory for reasons that are well-established. Family members, elderly people.
Yeah, but what happens when that 105-year-old parent deceases? So then you've got to establish one parking spot if you're going to rent it out to anybody else. So my belief is we continue with that one parking space minimum and two maximum in the current ordinance. But one space is dedicated for that ADU. Okay, Member Grant.
Oh, I'm getting ready to kick the can way down the road again. We were talking about impact fees. Some cities use the lack of impact fees as incentive to construct the ADUs. Some cities use, they only charge a minimum. I think they call it, what's the term called, de minimis or something like that?
I think Orange County
Yeah.
Yes.
is
Yeah,
one that does
something like that.
Exactly right.
I don't know if we can do that or not. You guys are smarter than I am when it comes to that kind of stuff. But that's one way, one incentive is to eliminate the impact fees. Again, I'm kicking the can way down the road, getting away from what he was saying here, which I really didn't want to do. But he mentioned it, and hey.
It was a field goal when you kicked the can.
Get the old brain working, man. Anyway.
I do think there are examples in communities that have done that where the analysis can prove it, that the number of trips generated from an accessory dwelling is different, less than a principal dwelling. If you do not address it, then I would suggest you, staff, is going to have no choice but to say you have to pay a full impact fee. And if I'm wrong, correct me, but I would suspect without any terminology to the otherwise, it's going to be a dwelling, accessory notwithstanding, and it's going to pay a dwelling unit's impacts.
Member Faison.
The whole point of an ADU and this conversation is to produce affordable housing.
True.
That's the whole point, because people cannot afford to do more. And as we allow these other things to kind of creep in, it's raising the cost of building an accessory dwelling unit, leaving only those who can afford it to get one. So Chelsea was nice enough to read off, or maybe it was Eddie, that read off the size of the lots. That medium size are 7,500 square feet. So already that no accessory dwelling units outdoors are permitted. And then high density is 6,500 square foot. Again, outside accessory dwelling units are not permitted. Right. So here we're looking at medium size and high density areas looking to add additional parking. Where? Where? Again, so now this leaves, the only place for accessory dwelling units to go is in our older neighborhoods. And some of those have smaller homes. So they won't even, at 25%, they may not meet the 400 square foot allowable size. So now the accessory dwelling units is still becoming not affordable. So we have to make sure if we're trying to achieve affordability, we have to look at the entire cost of building an ADU. Right now, it's not affordable.
As you would recall, in that summit meeting that 4 of us attended, an ADU, that one company that built ADUs, you could build in your backyard. The minimum cost was $145,000, and that did not include any pavement or concrete, anything like that. It was $145,000.
That's crazy.
And only in a 10,000 square foot yard. You have to have a minimum of 10,000 square foot to put that in your backyard.
What we need is a developer to come in and say, I'm going to build an affordable housing community. Problem solved. Okay?
I was going to follow up with your lot sizes. In the last meeting, we looked at a subdivision plan that came up, and some of the discussion was about the intensity of smaller lots and home sizes. That's the current trend that's taking place. That's what you see. The days of building executive lots are cost ineffective for builders unless you've got the economy of executive lots purchasers who build McMansions on them. So I kind of would conclude myself that accessory dwellings are probably more likely to occur in older neighborhoods by the nature of those standards. Trying to put a 400 square foot dwelling on a 7,500 square foot lot that contains a median-sized home on it and put another parking place, geometry-wise, you're going to be hard-pressed to do that. And back to the kind of notion about duplex and connectivity, other codes will allow you to connect accessory dwellings with a breezeway, but they won't let you conjoin them. They won't let you convert your carport into a dwelling because it becomes a duplex. And duplex is allowed in some zoning districts, as you mentioned, but not other ones. So
But in this case, I don't.
Wait a
I don't
minute,
think
wait a
that's all.
minute. Let's go in order here. The next one is Member Gilbert.
I was just thinking, I mean, I know we're talking about ADUs, but since affordability is like one of the big focuses on this, maybe a suggestion down the road, because I know it really doesn't apply to this discussion, but, somehow including a tiny house plan in the master development plan. So we're creating more affordable housing, and, and it doesn't have to be contingent upon people in the houses currently, I think it opens it up a lot more for affordable housing.
And I want to add to that, because I challenged the commission to take drives around town in new neighborhoods. Some of the neighborhoods, there's not 6 feet of property on their side. I mean, I don't know how some of these neighborhoods are doing it.
You know what, so to that has to be approved through here. That has to be approved here.
Well,
We have.
recommended for approval, yes.
Right, but we have a standard set by the city that says what lot sizes ought to be. And yet, when they come here, they ask for approval, it's a rubber stamp between here, there, and out the door they go. It's a rubber stamp constantly. And I will charge all of us to do what's in the best interest of the city. I think we have enough, at least on the plans, right, on the books, enough homes that are being built. There's plenty of homes on the books for being built. We don't need to keep saying yes to everything that comes before us.
We don't have the right, I don't see how we can deny.
It's a request, sure.
Member Perez was next.
Since affordability is really one of the primary focuses here, and not everybody's going to be doing this, I mean, this is going to be far and few in between, why not forego, some of these other extra things like that 1 or 2 parking space? How about up to 1 parking space? As an example.
What do you mean?
Well, like I said, this isn't going to be something that everybody's going to be doing, okay? It's going to be rather infrequent.
Right.
I don't think parking is a big issue, okay? It does add to the cost, so why not remove it?
That's one way of making it affordable. That's one way of making, remove one barrier that's a very costly barrier. Let's be honest, people already park on the streets. People park in the streets. I mean, that new neighborhood that we talked about, out there in Port St. John, they're going to be parking in the streets. Member Garot made a great example about that. Whether they say it or not, they're going to be doing it.
Which,
Have
Verona?
you- No,
Verona.
Verona. Have you driven through there?
Yeah.
They are parking in the street.
They're parking in the streets. So why not remove that one barrier? As you said, it's 10 grand. Remove the requirement for parking.
Chelsea?
So in order to move forward with that direction, perhaps Member Perez would like to make a motion that one of your suggestions could be formalized as by suggesting to council that subsection G be modified, amended to allow up to 2 or up to 1 to have no minimum requirement that one be added, but that you have up to 1 or 2, and that be a decision of this group on parking, and then you move on to the next thing, so that you don't have to keep beating this horse.
Make it 7 number 1.
Are you making that motion that Chelsea suggested?
Whoa, that was a lot of stuff.
She wrote me in on that one, didn't she?
But the very end basically said it all, okay? That we don't hold ourselves to a requirement for parking, but that we allow up to 1 parking space. That didn't sound like a motion, did it?
No.
Okay. So on the parking issue, I make the motion that these ADUs not be required to have parking, but they may have up to 1 parking space allotted to them in order to reduce the cost of what these units
Maybe the
cost.
professionals can-
I second.
Is that in concert with what you suggested? Okay. Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion?
So we, go ahead, sir.
Just in the discussion, that's one attribute of the accessory dwelling. Do you envision adding separate motions for each component of this as the bullet points asked to be addressed? For example, flexibility, I threw out there impact fee exemptions. Would we want to make one motion with many attributes or separate motions and separate?
I think it's separate motions to just clarify it and get some things off the table.
Certainly, that's the answer to the question.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Secretary Grant?
Did you?
I'll help you.
No, that's all right. Yes.
Member Faison?
Yes.
Member Garad?
Yes.
Member Perez?
Yes.
Chairman Richardson?
Yes. We've taken off, as I recall, the minimum size. We said it's going to remain at 400. Am I correct? Yes. Okay, we don't need a motion on that because we're agreeing with the current ordinance. Have we talked about historical structures?
I did. Nobody agreed.
Okay. Member Grant?
No. Historical structures are residential, and residential areas are residential, and ADUs go in residential areas. So I withdraw
Got
my
an Example
opposition.
right across the street.
I withdraw my opposition to building ADUs in historical areas.
So I have a question about the historical structures. Are these identified historical structures or just structures that are old and historical? Like just old quarters? For example, down in the corner here, across the tracks from the courthouse, those white buildings, but those are also identified as historical. So let's go across on the other side of the tracks. So on the west side of the tracks from the courthouse, that's the old, they call that area? It's there's a name for it, but I forgot.
West side.
But would that be considered historical?
Are you asking me whether the code would allow ADUs at that location? Or are you asking me if that specific structure is designated as a historic structure?
No, what I'm asking for, in this case here, the definition of what is an historical structure and an example.
The current code related to accessory dwelling units does not distinguish between whether a structure is historic or not.
Okay. All right, so Member Grant, I will agree with you that let's keep ADUs out of historical structures.
Eddie's already put them in there.
They're allowed in the RHP zoning district currently.
Yeah.
That's one of the zoning districts that currently allows ADUs is the RHP.
Right.
It's it's
But
this
not,
area.
sorry, not all structures in the RHP zoning district are designated as historic structures. It's just the zoning district, residential historic preservation.
And if a property is designated as a historic structure, then that specific property may have restrictions on changing that property. And so there may be, that particular historic property may have a designation that prevents it from changing the principal structure to add something like, what's the word, connected, attached.
Right.
ADU may be prohibited because of the designation on a specific
Do we have,
property.
I'm sorry, and forgive me for interrupting. Do we have restrictions on what can be done in historical?
There are
preservation?
historic properties that have restrictions on how the property can be changed, modified.
For
Yes.
instance?
I'd have to go to the historic register. I don't have those.
That one I know for sure is the one that was, that's why I want to kind of go to a different area. Going north here, going south to South Street, make that first right and then that first left. And there's a little white slave quarters
Yeah,
home
I know
that's
where
over
they are.
there.
I know where they are.
So that one is listed, I think, on the historical registry, I think, because they were looking at doing some renovations to it, and you had to have experience in historical restorations. So that property I know is a historical structure for sure. But then again, but across on the west side from the courthouse, that's also an historical, I think that's an RHB one. Is that what you said, RHB one?
RHP is the zoning district.
Yeah, so wouldn't that be on the west side from the courthouse? Is that where that RHB? Just so that we all have an area
I
of,
think it's the south is the east of Indian River Ave. And the area over here, south of the DMU is on the east side of US 1
Right.
is RHP,
okay.
correct?
RHP is generally south of Riverview Place, which comes off of Stephen House Way from the north and terminates on the south at just south of Bayview Street and is along the waterfront. The western boundary is between Indian River Avenue and US 1.
Okay, so only over here.
Right.
So that was kind of helping with my question. I got a little confused here. The bullet point talks about structures, so I'm envisioning a church would be an historic structure, but it wouldn't necessarily be a dwelling. And there would be historic structures in this zoning district. I believe there are. The conversation's accessory dwellings on residential homes, and there are residential homes in this zoning district that's historic. And within the zoning district that's historic, I suspect the former chairman's home might be the example. They're not just euphemistically known as historic, they may be so designated, National Historic Registry, State Historic Registry, even the city could recognize such. So the dwelling that would be in those zoning districts that wouldn't be the structure, but a resident home, I would suspect unless you've got like a National Historic Registry designation that requires you to go through onerous things to maintain that designation on the one hand, to obtain the designation on the other hand, works with architectural compatibility. It wouldn't, in some places, you can't hardly drive a nail into the board of an older home because you need a permit to make sure you use the same wood. It's very complex. Does Titusville have anything at that level where you have literally homes that are only allowed to be constructed in certain very specific codes for the historic preservation?
A certified designated historic home would have to receive a certificate of appropriateness for any modifications to the structure to make sure that it maintains its historic nature.
And that could include how it looks.
Yeah.
So the opportunity as you said, the former chairman had apparently one of these, I remember mentioning the council talked about that, had a dwelling accessory, used to be Airbnb kind of thing, and it is compatible with the home, and if you use that example, if I haven't seen that home, I'm not familiar with it, but I'm seeing it in my mind's eye, if you saw that, it's self-policing. You would have to convert I lived in one in Mississippi, actually, a carriage house.
Yeah.
Converted, it was a horse carriage, and then it became my rental apartment. And it was a historic designated property. So I'm speaking from my own personal experience, I recognize how that is. If it is in the zoning district, and it is a residential use of the zoning district as opposed to, for example, a church or a like-kind building, shouldn't those be allowed? I think you would agree, you said you kind of understand it could be something you would want somebody to have.
Excellent, yeah, I would, but that would require the ADU to take on the same type of architectural design and look as the original structure.
And I think in those zoning districts that emphasize that historic nature or recognize the historic benefit, I would certainly think you'd want to police that for compatibility with the architecture, right? You wouldn't want to just have a concrete block.
Or a tiny home on wheels.
All the above, right. I think you have to actually just kind of come to maybe recognize that if you can have a residential use within the zoning district that's historic, and whether it's historically designated or it's not, that at least you have some compatibility to it. It would emphasize, I think, the nature of a historic district, kind of maybe improve the characteristics rather than disintegrate the characteristics by building something that's just not compatible with the other like-kind homes.
So right now, there's no requirement for an ADU to have certain historic requirements in the RHP zoning district unless there's something specific to that property that is specifically designated. And not, I just want to make sure everyone understands, not all properties, not all residences within the RHP zoning district are classified as, or designated by the city or national registry. So there's only a handful.
And I think that's exactly on point where I was headed. In that zoning district, because there is a possibility, probability, likelihood, or existing examples of historic structures, actually historic residents more particularly, that maybe or maybe not qualify for National Historic Registry designation, that when you're in that zoning district, you should have the staff look at some degree of compatibility review. And in only that zoning district. Other zoning districts, I couldn't see why you would care if somebody had a concrete block house and wanted to build a wood frame accessory dwelling, or reverse that, in my opinion. But in that district where there's a possibility of that, that could be like an overlay to the district that requires the staff to look at compatibility architecturally.
I'd like to remind my fellow commissioners that I know that a lot of times we talk about ADUs as being an external addition to the property. Remember, that property has to have 10,000 square feet in order to have an outside ADU, to have an attached property. So most of these won't be outside, they'll be inside the home. So there'll be modifications done inside the home to make it fit, unless, again, that property has 10,000 square feet or more. So, and over here, I don't think that there are too many properties over here that have that size of a lawn.
Okay, at this point, we have made some decisions, the square footage and the parking, and we're hung up now on historic districts. We'll just call it for this meeting, and then we'll talk about the other things on the agenda, and we'll discuss it further at our next meeting, which is the second meeting in July. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Next item, planned development minimum living area. Here we go again.
Did we just talk about this?
Eddie, it's your,
Thank you. I won't read the description. Member Rogers, I believe, initially introduced this item, suggesting that maybe the commission might want to consider reducing the minimum living area for planned developments. I believe specifically looking at multifamily apartments, which currently require a minimum of 600 square feet. I'm not sure if the commission wanted to discuss this or wait until when alternate member Rogers came back. But because there was a consensus to add this to your next agenda, we brought it forward to you.
And he won't be back until August. He's requested, and he's been granted a leave of absence for the meetings in July, but he did mention today also.
We're supposed to have this done by August, right?
Not this. This was an add-on.
Was
This
added.
item has not been brought to city council. This is just something that was brought up in general discussion at the last P and Z meeting. So this is your, you can make that suggestion to council, and then they'll let you know, advise you if there's any further information they need from you all.
Well, how does the commission feel? Delaying this item until he gets back, or just going ahead with endorsing the way it is now? Member Garrett?
With respect to the missing member who, that was their main conversation, I would certainly like to defer it. It's not, I believe, something pressing. It's not the matter that couldn't be discussed later. I'd certainly think we should,
Is that a motion to table until August?
yes, we'll
First meeting in
hear this in
August.
August.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Member Grant?
No, I'm still trying to figure out why this is even,
Member Faison? Okay, roll call, please.
I'm sorry, I missed the second.
Mr. Perez.
Oh, thank you. Member Faison?
Yes.
Member Perez?
Yes.
Member Garad?
Yes.
Secretary Grant?
Yes.
Chairman Richardson?
Yes. Okay. And we go back to citizens to be heard. I don't think we have any real citizens here. Oh, introduction, yeah. You sat through this whole thing.
You're not like Eddie. Eddie's not going to use ordinary.
Please allow me to introduce Christy Anderson. Christy's our new senior planner.
Thank you. It's a
well-
pleasure to meet you all, and I look forward to working with you.
Okay, fantastic.
May I ask, where have you come from to Titusville?
I have been working for the city of Cocoa Beach for the last 8 years.
Oh,
Thank you.
they're going through some times right now, aren't they? City manager and the police chief. Okay. Petitions and requests from the public prison. Okay. Reports, staff?
Allow me to introduce Christy Anderson. No, I'm just kidding. I did also just want to mention that July 5th, the next regularly scheduled P and Z meeting has officially been canceled. We won't have quorum, so we've gone ahead and canceled that meeting in advance for you all. So happy holidays. And then September 7th is a regularly scheduled P and Z meeting as well that will be canceled. All of our staff will be at the Florida Planning Conference in Jacksonville during that week. So we will go ahead and send out a notice and give you an extra week off.
Okay. City attorney?
No update. 4th of July will be held at the Chain of Lakes, and you all are invited to attend.
And we want to know about the baby.
She's one. She had her
She is
1 year
really
checkup
one?
today. She's already a one. It's amazing. Her first word was my dog's name, Apollo.
Wasn't mom or dad?
So will we be getting VIP seating at this,
First come, first serve.
Okay. My report is just, I want to remind you, if you haven't already, to submit your financial reports. It's due July 1. It's very easy.
What is that?
The financial report. You should have gotten, would you have gotten one?
I don't think it's required for
Okay.
the non-voting school board member.
Okay.
Okay.
You basically have to tell about every asset you own. Do you have a report?
Not a report, I have a question, as it would be. And I'll begin by saying, perhaps I'm Don Quixote and I'm chasing windmills. Is it a concern or question to the members of the council to maybe give a presentation, a discussion on what I was focused in the last meeting concerning building height? I also watched the city council following the recommendation for the project where I had raised the question of zoning districts' standard of height maximum and building codes interpretation provision for where is the building's height measured, and the allowance for creating a geometric pattern under the building codes that allows for peaked roofs that would otherwise exceed the height of the wall of the building, and zoning district rules which speak in very finite terms. The height of a building in a zoning district is the height of the building. And quite frankly, what was interesting was if you watch the presentation in response to what that was discussed about, I believe it was presented to say that the zoning code is interpreted to be the building code, which is interpreted by the building official to take into effect the height. So if you just heard what I said, an interpretation of an interpretation, as opposed to a finite standard. And I can only say to the council members that this is something that is experienced in communities where the interpretive ability of a code can lead to some degree of angst later on when the public that came to a meeting and was told it won't be but 50 feet high, and when it gets done, it's 62 feet high. And using an example here, I'll use an example so that you'll understand, well, I would like to have this discussed if we can, and that's my question. When is whenever, but I'll use an example. You take a building and you say it's only going to be 100 feet tall, and live locally, as you saw the presentation, you have an envelope now, all of where you're at, that the building over here on the river is going to be the model by which you measure the height of buildings unrestricted by local rules. So even if you come up with a good rule, it's preempted if you use that live local act.
Member Garrard, could I suggest a procedural?
Sure.
Okay. The role of the commission is to provide recommendations to council, and council can decide what the Planning and Zoning Commission should be providing information on. So I think what might be best is to, just at a very basic level, ask if the commission would like to send this to council, so that council can decide if they want to provide advisability
perfect.
to Planning and Zoning Commission to further discuss.
That's absolutely perfect.
Yes, but I would strongly suggest that he have a discussion with the planning staff before you make that, just a general discussion to clarify everything, before you make that council advise on it.
Well, I understand what Eddie's saying. I think that's proper. My concern as a council member is whether everybody understands what really is building height, how determination is. And because I think it's a reasonable discussion to ask city council to mull over that notion, which was briefly addressed in the last meeting they had about that, and perhaps allow the planning commission to see some presentations and further, and I'm a little confused because I'm not sure where the whole ADU came from, but it's on the floor for discussion. So if it's the proper path to go to council with a recommendation that they consider allowing us to discuss that, like ADU, might be a possible code alternative, or at least to refine what it is height is, I would certainly appreciate that. Did I make everybody confused? I said I was Don Quixote.
Yeah, to a degree, because let's take one thing at a time.
This is future. It can be any time in the next, hopefully 10 years before I pass away, or at least in this year before I get removed. I don't know, but anyway, either way, down the road.
Is it 1 o'clock already?
Okay.
No
Any-
one's promised tomorrow.
Any other reports from the commission? All righty. We stand adjourned at 7:52 PM.
Where's your gavel, sir?